Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side. Happy Saturday, Rocky Mountains, KGAB AM 650, and the Town Square Network serving the Intermountain West. And Easy 101, Colorado Springs, serving southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. And, of course, the Monster, 780 AM, Denver. Hello, New Mexico to Montana and Utah to Nebraska. This is the third part in our Get Acquainted with Obamacare. It's Not Your Friend series. The last two shows, of course, go back in the archives. We had a great economist on 2 weeks ago, kind of middle of the road, some good facts, a few things I didn't know. And then last week, we had a Obama administration mouthpiece on. Very interesting show. I think you'll learn lots, and you'll learn what they really don't want to talk about, like the IPAB, which he denied, and the IRS study, which he denied. But a very informative show, and certainly gives you a glimpse into the mindset on the other side. And today we are very fortunate to have Dr. Elizabeth Vliet with us, and we're going to be calling her Dr. Vliet during the show. And she has some great websites, which I'm going to go over with you guys. But today's show is really different than anything else you've heard, because we're going to focus on how Obamacare affects women. That's right, gals. This is going to affect you. It's going to affect your families. It's going to affect you even more if you happen to be an older gal. And Dr. Vliet is going to be telling us all about this, because this is what she does. She has 3 terrific websites. One is www.herplace.com. The next, which is about medical freedom and privacy, is www.internationalhealthstrategiesltd.com. And the third, which is about patient empowerment, is www.patientpoweramerica.com. And we'll go over those. We'll give you those later in the show, too. So welcome to the show, Dr. Vliet.
Thank you so much, Reid. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And I thought what we would do today, because I want to give the females of my audience, and by the way, guys, this will definitely affect how dinner is cooked, how many smiles you get, and the health of your family and your beloved wife or other half in the future. So I would suggest you stay tuned in. Gals, you're going to be shocked. What I'd like to do today, Dr. Vliet, is kind of start with your overall impression of Obamacare. Then we're going to talk about how that kind of narrows down to how females are impacted, because I don't think they have a clue how impacted they are. We're going to talk about finance. We're going to talk about quality of life. We're going to talk about access to care. And we're going to talk about the differences, because they're pretty stark and pretty sinister in my mind, between how Obamacare treats young women versus old women. How does that sound for you?
I think that's very, very critical. And one of the things I would add to what you said to the men in your audience, they better listen up, because it may affect the life of the women that you care about.
Absolutely.
It isn't just something as simple as whether or not she's going to feel well enough to cook dinner. It's whether she may survive or not.
That's right. I was being facetious, but Obamacare
but I wanted the guys to know that it really is potentially serious. So they should stay tuned and listen.
Yeah, Obamacare, folks, is life and death for many of you, female or male, who are listening. I'm not over-dramatizing that. It's life and death. And it will impact your wallet if you're lucky enough to be one of the ones who kind of weaves through the navigational nightmare that this bill is. Let's talk a little bit, Dr. Vliet, first about your overall impression of Obamacare, and then maybe you could kind of bring it down into the female context for us.
And I will do that. And let me say to your listeners, I'm speaking as an independent physician. I have no ties financially or allegiance to any health systems, insurance companies, political parties, or anyone other than the patient. I have always stood for being a patient advocate, and I have no political affiliation. I'm a registered independent. I'm very concerned about what I see happening as an overview, and it's fundamental that people understand that Obamacare is a push towards government control of all health care decisions, taking it out of the hands of you, your family, your minister, priest, rabbi, pastor, and your doctor, because the micromanaging will be done from Washington by the Department of Health and Human Services, and treatments will be decided as to what you're eligible for and what you're not eligible for based on things like your age and whether or not you're too fat or too short or too tall, or you smoke too much or you drink too much, or they just plain don't like you, because the government will decide the medical care guidelines.
Let me add one quick thing, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Folks, if you're sitting there smugly, oh, I have my Blue Cross, I have my Blue Shield, I have my Aetna, I have my Humana, guess again. Because the way this bill is structured over the next 3 or 4 years, eventually, even if you are privately insured, the government folks will be able to tell your doctor, regardless of the fact you are privately insured, what they can and can't do for you.
You're right, Reid, and actually it's more sinister than that, because the government has set up all of the required covered services, has dictated to the private insurance companies what the cost has to be, how the underwriting is going to go, and what types of services need to be included in each policy, basically taking away all of the private decisions that a normal private business would be able to make for their particular company. And in doing that, they have set it up so that the consumers think they have a private policy, but they don't. It's controlled by the government mandates and requirements. So it's set up to blame the private insurance companies when people get denied coverage. But make no bones about it, the decision was made in Washington. It's not the private insurance companies that are free to decide, and that changed with the passage of the law in 2010. In fact, the goal is to drive private insurance companies out of the market by raising the cost and making it so complex and so costly that people drop out of the private insurance market and go to the government-run exchanges, which then means that we are moved even faster to their goal of a single-payer, government-controlled, nationalized, or socialized medical system as we see in Canada and Britain today.
Exactly, folks, and you've heard me talk about it before. Listen, one of the things which you folks out there in the audience can do, Google up the words Barack Obama single-payer system, or the words Barack Obama, insurance companies will go out of business. And you can hear these words that you just heard from Dr. Vliet from our Commander-in-Chief himself, except he doesn't want you to shall we say, see them on the evening news. Why don't we leave it at that? So, Dr. Vliet, I think you and I are kind of on the same wavelengths on this incredible encroachment into all aspects of our lives. And, I love the Democrats running around talking about the war on women. At the same time, they support the Muslim Brotherhood, which supports Sharia, which is the ultimate war on women. But putting that aside, tell us about how Obamacare, besides intruding into everybody's lives, dictating what kind of services they can or can't get, even if they're paying their own insurance, and moving us down the freight train, the freight trail, shall we say, to a brick wall wreck of a single-payer system. What does it do to gals? because gals have been fed a bill of goods here for the last 5 years about the war on women. So let's investigate what Obamacare does to and for women.
Well, one of the things that gives a good example of how badly screwed up the government guidelines can be when they are deciding what's in your best interest medically would be to go back to 2002 when the government-sponsored study on hormones for menopausal women got press conference and scared women across the country deliberately.
And this was about not using estrogen, right?
That's right, or not using hormones for menopause.
Right.
And so the NIH, the head of NIH, who had another agenda, trying to drive research money into statin medications for heart disease, was deliberately slanting the data and exaggerating the risk, which has come out over the last decade, and scaring women about the use of hormones. In fact, he was quoted as saying, "I intend to make a big splash. I don't think women should be taking hormones for menopause." Well, it turns out that this study was one group of women, elderly women with a lot of health risk and a lot of problems, and it was combined hormone therapy, not estrogen alone, but everyone thought it was estrogen, and women in droves stopped taking their hormones. Well, spring forward another decade, and let's look at what's happened. Dr. Sorrell and researchers at Yale University School of Medicine have analyzed the impact of the government-sponsored Women's Health Initiative and the presentation of the data and the guidelines that came from it, and they have found that by avoiding estrogen, 50,000 women, at a conservative estimate, have lost their lives prematurely over the last decade because they avoided taking hormones that actually help reduce the risk of heart disease. And not only heart disease, but the women who took estrogen alone had a 60% lower risk of breast cancer than women taking no hormones. The opposite of what was presented in 2002. This is a good example in women's lives of your government at work and how government guidelines may be hazardous to your health because they're serving a different agenda. It's not necessarily all that you think it is from the news reports.
It's absolutely not about health.
No, the whole health care law is not about medical care or health care or preventive care. It's about government controlling 1/6 of our economy and being able to direct the spending of money, particularly for Medicare and Medicaid patients, and controlling the private sector of insurance as well, so that all of the entire healthcare sector of our economy, which accounts for 1/6 of our entire economic output. I mean, it's huge, and in one fell swoop, the government has taken total control of that.
Well, you know,
that is opposite of what our founding fathers believed for this country and what people have been used to.
And I happen to think it goes further than that. I mean, you know, the economic byproduct is nice, but I really think it comes down to control of individuals, a lessening of individual freedoms, and a molding of what used to be individuals into a collective mass, if you will. You know, talking about that, and I want to get back to this, I want to get back to gals, but tell folks a little bit, because my guest last week, the Obama mouthpiece, denied there was an IPAB until I nailed him down on it. Oh, yes. Oh, I guess there is one in 3 years. Tell the folks a little bit about what the IPAB is. What is that board? Who appoints it? And what kind of god-awful control do they have over your life once they're in place?
The IPAB refers to the Independent Payment Advisory Board. This is the body that was set up in the law passed in February 2009. People know it as the Troubled Assets Relief, or TARP, legislation. So that Independent Payment Advisory Board was created in the TARP legislation a year before the Obamacare law itself was passed. And I think that's partly how the Democrats and the Obama mouthpieces you just spoke with last week get away with flagrantly misrepresenting it. They say, well, it's not in the health care law. Well, technically it's not. It was in the TARP legislation, but it is the same effect. Independent Payment Advisory Board means independent from all review. There is no judicial oversight. There is no medical oversight. There is no congressional oversight. This board is 15 unelected bureaucrats appointed by the president to meet his agenda, whoever the president may be, and their stated job is to control cost. Now, I don't know about you, but I suspect that most of us were not born yesterday, and when they talk about controlling cost, that's a euphemism for rationing medical care, denying medical care, so that they don't have to pay for it.
Well, I mean, there's only two ways to control costs, right? You either give less of something, or you make whatever you give less costly, or a combination of the two. It's the only way to do it.
Exactly. And the way that every government-run medical system in the world, and I've researched it extensively, I've been to many other countries, I've actually been a patient in the National Health Service in England, and I dare say that most Americans would be appalled at the experience that British patients go through. But let me just say that in every single government-run system in the world, they cut cost by denying services, by delaying access to care. Now, if you have a serious medical problem, like many Canadians, you may die waiting to get access to care. Every Canadian has a national health care card, but the card doesn't get them the medical care when they need it. The average wait in Canada for a primary care doctor is almost a year or longer, depending upon what part of Canada you live in. They may wait 6 months to get an MRI to diagnose a tumor. Most Canadians with any means at all, if they have a serious medical problem, they either get on a plane and come to the United States, or they get on a plane and go to India. One of the biggest sources of medical tourism in India are patients escaping the national health system in England and Canada, going where they can get an MRI quickly, pay for what they need, and come home. So your listeners are not used to the fact that we have never had this problem in the United States. You may have an insurance company deny coverage for a particular procedure or an MRI, or you may have to jump through some hoops to get it. But if the insurance company denies paying for it, you have two choices. Your doctor can do an appeal, which we do all the time, or you can pay cash. And half the time, the cash price is much lower anyway. So you still can get what you need. Under IPAB and under the new guidelines, if Medicare, Medicaid, or your private insurance denies the service, you're not allowed to pay cash for it, number one. And number two, you may still find that and there's no appeal at all. You cannot appeal the decisions of the IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Judges can't overrule them. Congress can't overrule them. Patients cannot appeal it, and doctors cannot appeal it. That is night and day different from the situation that exists today with private insurance companies and all of us being able to appeal their decisions if we need to.
It's going to be pretty interesting when IPAB rulings meet disgruntled citizens meets that clause in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, which is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
They've already affected the right to life by controlling access to medical care. If you look
absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what we were talking about, folks, at the beginning of the show. I know a lot of you are sitting back there. I've gotten the emails. I've talked to you on the phone. And you're saying, I got my own private insurance. I pay for it myself. I'm fine. Wrong. That's about to change. You really need to understand this concept. These people are going to control just about everything in your life, including the health care you or your loved ones get, period. End of story. That is their goal. That is what's set up. That is where it's going within the next 3 years. Let's talk about how this affects women, Dr. Vliet.
Well, let's look at the fact that we already went through the first phase of cutbacks in cancer screening, and the two that they picked to start with were cervical cancer screening for young women and mammograms for older women. So let's look at what happened with that. The mammogram cutbacks, in other words, starting screening, annual screening at age 50 instead of age 40, at a time when breast cancers among women between 35 and 50 are increasing. They decided that if you screen women between 40 and 50, it costs more to save a life. Of course, if it's your life, then I guess you consider that pretty important. It's fairly priceless at that point. So there was no new medical data that led the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force to recommend changing the mammogram screening. It's simply they added cost effectiveness to the medical effectiveness of mammograms and said, oh, gee, it costs more to screen women between 40 and 50, so we're going to change our recommendations to start annual screening at age 50. That's an example of the government at work when cost becomes the issue rather than medical effectiveness. The medical studies clearly show that screening women annually for breast cancer between age 40 and 50 saves lives. No question. The stage 1 survival rate, 5-year survival in the United States is better than 95% for stage 1 breast cancer. If you go to Europe where they don't screen as often and they don't screen with mammograms starting at 40 like we do, and they screen every 3 or 4 years, the death rate from stage 1 breast cancer drops down, the 5-year survival drops down to about 60%. So that means roughly 35% more women in the United States live longer after a diagnosis of breast cancer than anywhere else.
Let me ask you a question. I want to get off base just a tiny bit, because we're going to talk about eugenics a little bit. Bottom line is the Obamacare is set up to take money from young people to pay for old people who need more medical services, obviously, as they age. And the way they get this in balance over the long term is to have less old people. I mean, it's very simple. We're cutting costs, right? Welcome to the IPAB. So have you done any research on, the typical medical costs over a lifetime for a male versus a female? Is a female higher?
Women's medical costs throughout the lifespan are typically higher than men's.
So,
and that has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the fact that women's endocrine system is more complicated than men's, has to do with the fact that older women have more of the debilitating diseases that affect them at higher numbers than men. It has to do with the fact that women have children and have all of the healthcare costs associated with pregnancy and delivery and infertility and all of that. So, yes, the national statistics have always shown that healthcare costs for women are greater than for men. For older women, it increases even more, and that's where this is particularly insidious, because Medicare has, under the new healthcare law, they've actually stolen $720-some billion.
Billion.
Excuse me?
$715 billion.
Okay. So
what's
$715 billion, anywhere over $100 billion. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, what's $5 billion among his friends, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And so that is the equivalent, roughly, of cutting all Medicare services for everybody for 2 years. So when you cut that much from Medicare and shift it over to Medicaid to pay for younger people, women will be differentially hurt by that, because women live longer than men, on average 7 to 10 years longer than men, and women have higher health care costs as they age. They're more frail. They have more bone loss. They have more fractures. They have higher rates of dementia, depression. They have very high rates of heart disease. Breast cancer actually is further down on the list of what kills women. What kills women in large numbers are osteoporotic fractures, bone loss, fractures, and heart disease.
Just out of curiosity, let's wax philosophic for a moment. It's a given fact that they're trying to cut costs. It's a given fact they have an IPAB in there to limit services. It's a given fact that the young are, for right now, going to be paying for the old but getting reimbursed by this cut in Medicare and shift to Medicaid under Obamacare. So it's not a quantum leap to say that the faster they could, shall we say, foster the die-off of older females in this society, the faster they would be able to bring health care costs, in their minds, in balance, number one, and number two, the more money they would have to dedicate to younger, more productive members of society. Is that a quantum leap, or is that kind of connecting dots?
It's not a quantum leap at all. In fact, it's absolutely stated by Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, who's Rahm Emanuel's brother, and Ezekiel Emanuel served as the White House Chief Health Policy Advisor. He wrote quite clearly, going back to 1996 and perhaps earlier, saying in his Complete Lives system, medical cost should be rationed or attenuated, he used the word he used, for people over 50. And
exactly.
And you don't have to connect the dots. He wrote it, and he said, we need doctors who stop focusing on the individual and the oath of Hippocrates. We need to train doctors away from the oath of Hippocrates, focus on individual patients, and teach doctors to focus on the collective good for society, which means the government decides who's valuable, who gets the health care resources, and doctors have to serve a government agenda. Again, that is absolutely the antithesis of Christian beliefs, of the Greek traditions of healing, of the entire medical profession for 2,500 years, 2,500 years of medical tradition focused on the individual patient. And this administration wants to go to the Marxist view that the collective comes before the individual.
And I might add that it rubs soot on the whole quote-unquote moral argument, which is one of Obamacare proponents' talking points. But, you know, if we go one step further, folks, this is esoteric, but I think that everybody has heard of the NSA. Everybody knows what the PRISM program is now. Everybody knows your emails are being read, your phones are being listened to, where you call from, who you call to, how long you call, is all being cataloged. Now, let's throw into that equation the fact that they would know by what websites you visit and what you do and what you say, what your political beliefs are, or what your religious beliefs are. in addition to knowing your age and whether or not you're retired and whether or not you are, in the terms of the government, a productive member of society, i.e. producing goods and services and paying taxes to support the collective. I'm not sure I trust the government to not trade that information with IPAB to, shall we say, assist them in their decision-making process. I'm sure some of you people out there are rolling your eyes, but I want you to think about it. There's an awful lot of information out there. There's an awful lot of government people that are going to be controlling and pulling the strings of your life. And I think we have seen, without a doubt, presidents on both sides of the aisle, but maybe more so in the last 5 years, they are not loath to shall we say, punish their enemies and reward their friends. And you know, the biggest gift or the biggest stick you can use is somebody's life.
I think it is a very chilling portent of what is to come with the IRS overseeing Obamacare when you look at the IRS known targeting of political opposition.
Admitted targeting. So what else along the female-male line? What other nastiness is in this bill that is kind of targeted at females?
Well, I mentioned the recommendation to cut back on cervical cancer, and we're seeing a rise in cervical cancer in young women, and that's related to the sexual promiscuity because cervical cancer is a sexually transmitted viral disease, we now know.
And that's HPV.
So in recommending that they cut back on cervical cancer screening for young women, you don't pick up the cancer as early when it's as treatable. And that's another issue that differentially is affecting women. But going back to this whole government flawed guidelines on the use of hormones, one of the things, I mean, this has been my career focus, is endocrine aging in men and women. And what are the hormonal factors that contribute to people either having good quality of life as they age and lower health risk, or people becoming debilitated, losing muscle strength, losing energy, losing bone, losing mental function, not sleeping well, mood going haywire, joints hurting, no sex drive, no zest. And that happens to men and women at different ages as they lose these important reproductive hormones, testosterone for men, estrogen and testosterone primarily for women. So when the government guidelines are telling half the population that they should not be using hormones, flying in the face of what the world research is showing about the benefits of hormones, then they are also condemning older women to poorer quality of life because they're not bringing into medical care the new research on what hormones do to keep you energetic and keep your brain sharp and help you sleep well and help maintain your metabolism so you don't gain weight, and also lower your risk of diabetes and heart disease and even breast cancer, we now know. So those are some further ways that when the government is controlling all the decision-making about the treatment guidelines, about what is recommended and therefore what gets approved by Medicare, you risk having your quality of life robbed and you risk dying sooner.
Is it fair to say that, number one, women are more targeted in this bill overall than men, although everybody is targeted? And number two, that older women in particular are primary targets of this bill?
Well, older women have never really been valued in hardly any culture except possibly the Asian cultures and Native American cultures, traditionally. So I would say yes, it is correct that older women in the healthcare field are more costly. They are in the way of money going to younger people. So if the agenda of this administration is to focus healthcare resources on younger people, as Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel wrote extensively in his published papers on the complete life system, which is the basis for the healthcare law, then yes, older women are differentially impacted. Their lives are in jeopardy because they're costly. Basically, we need to look at the fact that the government wants older women and older men out of the way. And some of them have even gone so far as to say it.
So folks, when you hear the Democrats talk about the war on women, think about the fact that not a single Republican voted for this bill. Put 2 and 2 together, and you'll come up with 4. The bottom line of all this is that women are bigger target. Everybody is a target. Women are bigger targets than men. The older you are, the bigger the target you are under Obamacare. I might add, folks, you can go back in the archives on the rightsideradio.com. Just type in the word Obama's Czars at the top in the search bar and listen to my 2 shows on Obama's Czars. 60% of his czars believe in eugenics. I'm going to make this really simple. Eugenics is basically deciding who lives or dies depending upon their age and their productivity for society. It's exactly what Emanuel wrote about, except that 60% of Obama's advisors have written books or publicly promulgated the idea of eugenics. These are the people who have put into place and who will administer and who will choose the IPAB in Obamacare. So let's talk about finance, because another way that you can kind of beat down the opposition, beat down those that you'd kind of like to see depart early, is by money, right? So how are the finances of females affected under Obamacare, Dr. Vliet?
Everyone, male or female, is going to be paying more for medical insurance policies, health insurance policies. For example, Indiana insurance regulators expect a 72% rate hike next year. Obama has said that you could keep your doctor, keep your health insurance policy if you like it. Well, that's another misrepresentation, because with a 72% rate hike in one state, and Ohio is expecting 88%, and California is warning of 120% increases and more.
And Florida is 35%. Nevada is 101%.
What's that?
And I said Nevada is 101%. Florida is 35%. Missouri is 47%. I mean, huge increases across the board.
Across the board, these are huge amounts of financial hits to men and women at a time when the economy is staggering under the lack of a true recovery. So,
come on, this is the summer of recovery.
Yeah, right. Well, that's to the people who are out of work and who are so discouraged. If they really were doing honest reporting of the true unemployment number, which would include people who stopped looking because they got discouraged, our unemployment figures would be, close to 15%.
Yeah, it's actually U6 on the Department of Labor is 14.3% right now.
Wow. So I'm not far off. That is truly staggering. So costs for everybody are going to go up at a time when people can ill afford higher medical insurance premiums. Now, remember what I said. The goal is to make it so costly that people will drop their private plans and go on the government-run exchanges, which drives people to single payer faster. Women's premiums generally run a little higher than men's across the board. So I think we can expect to see, because we've already said, that women need more medical care throughout their lives than men do. So I think we can expect to see that ratings on private policies going forward from 2014 will show higher rates for women than for men of the same age. Now, we already know that elderly women, there are far more elderly women living in poverty than elderly men who live in poverty. So if you've already got older women being poorer, having higher medical costs, having more debilitating diseases, and then you drop on them the fact that their health insurance premiums will also be higher, it's making a perfect storm situation for elderly women that's going to seriously compromise quality of life in the years left. It's going to differentially affect their number of years of survival because medical care won't be as available to them, and they won't have as many effective preventive screenings as they've been used to having, nor will they have as many medication options, and more they'll be pushed into having fewer surgeries because it costs more, which means, as Obama said in the 2008 election, well, I think, maybe my grandmother should have just had a pain pill instead of another hip surgery.
Right.
Well, he shouldn't be making that decision. That should be made between the patient and the doctor.
Well, those who are making the decisions have voted to not be part of the process. I mean, I find the whole thing absolutely outrageous. But that is a whole other discussion because I find lots of things outrageous. So another way that the expenses for gals are going to go up, whether you're young or old, is the IPAB says no to your procedure, even though you have private insurance, in its waning days as they move towards single payer. And, you have a life-threatening situation, or you have a huge life quality situation. You have a broken hip. You have, a bad back, and a disc out of, I can go on and on and on. The bottom line is you're going to have to take money out of your pocket, and you're going to have to fly to India. And I'm not being facetious. You're going to have to fly to India to get that work done because you're simply not going to get it approved no matter what in the United States.
And, I think people just don't believe you that really is coming. But it's clear that it is from everything that they've said. Now, I think India is an awfully long way to go. There may be resources closer. Mexico, Chile still have private services available. Costa Rica and Panama have developed a reputation for medical tourism for certain things. But the bottom line is when you are sick, when you're in pain, it is really hard on you to have to get on a plane and fly somewhere, whether it's 4 hours or 12 hours or 18 hours. It's really difficult to have to be flown out of the country to get the medical care you need.
And it's difficult on your pocketbook. You're paying your insurance premiums, whatever insurance you may have at that time. Your insurance won't cover it. The IPAB won't approve it. So in addition to paying your premiums for coverage you're not receiving, you're going to incur the extra expense to travel somewhere else to get the services you can no longer get in the United States. It's a pocketbook thing as well as a quality of life thing.
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's not only quality of life, it's whether or not you live or die.
Yes, absolutely. Well, bad quality of life is dying.
You're right. That's the ultimate bad quality, but you can have some bad quality along the way.
Absolutely. We're going to take a little station ID right now, Dr. Vliet, and when we come back, I want to finish up kind of this finance discussion because I want to talk to people about taxes. Because in addition to these skyrocketing rates, we're going to be facing all sorts of new taxes. We already are, and there's a $1.7 trillion so far shortfall in trying to fund this law over the next 10 years. And then I want to talk about literally quality of life, not only for the gals, young and old, but for their family. I want them to understand this is not just about them, although they are the primary targets. This really is a war on women, voted for unanimously by Democrats, promulgated and postulated exclusively by a Democratic administration, and by the way, previous Democratic administrations. And I want to talk about quality of life for the family. What is this going to mean for quality of life for a gal's family? So we will be right back. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side with Dr. Elizabeth Vliet. We are talking about Obamacare and its specific impact on women. Lots of stuff, gals, you didn't know, but you have a big bullseye on your health. Big bullseye. I am talking to you out of KGAB AM and the Town Square Network, Cheyenne and the Rocky Mountain West, 101 FM Easy out of Colorado Springs, serving northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, and also Denver, 780 AM, the Monster Station. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal. I'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Reid Lance Rosenthal, host of On the Right Side, knows the West like he knows his opinions. Inside out with conviction and passion. And this is what fuels his #1 best-selling multi-award-winning epic, Threads West, an American Saga. If you haven't read Threads West, get it now. If you have, get the second book in the series, Maps of Fate. Passion, conviction, and the romance of the West. Reid's books, Reid's shows. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening to On the Right Side. Saturdays at 3 p.m. For the show replays, visit www.ontherightsideradio.com.
Welcome back, folks. Happy Saturday. Reid Lance Rosenthal on the phone with Dr. Elizabeth Vliet. I'm going to give you her websites really quickly again. We're toward the end of the show. We're going to cover two things here from now to the end, and that is quality of life for women and their families, because it's important to you, really important to you. And we're going to wind up the show with Dr. Vliet telling you what you might do to try and protect yourself from this beast and what she's doing as a woman to try and shield herself from what's coming. So, number one, her websites are www.herplace.com. Number two, www.internationalhealthstrategiesltd.com. And that's about medical freedom. And then www.patientpoweramerica.com. And that's about patient empowerment. I really suggest you visit those websites. You're going to get some detailed insights and some detailed, shall we say, ideas on perhaps how to try and protect yourself from this freight train that's headed at you. So, Dr. Vliet, welcome back to the show. Let's talk about the quality of life for women. I mean, a very important thing in most women's lives is their family, whether it's their parents or their kids or their husband or, whatever the familial unit might be. How is this going to affect what we know as the family from a woman's standpoint?
Well, I think that the real tragedy is the way that the government is intruding into every aspect of our private, personal, family lives and our values and our freedom and our ability to live our lives that we determine with the people that we choose to see for medical care or schooling or whatever. So many freedoms that we've taken for granted are being intruded upon by every day under assault by this administration. And I think the privacy is huge. I mean, I have women in my office sobbing because they don't want all of their personal medical information turned over to the government. That's one of the reasons that we're setting up an international company so that medical consulting based offshore can maintain patients' privacy and medical freedom.
And that's giving them that's your International Health Strategies Ltd.com?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great.
And I'm vehemently opposed to the government intruding into the patient's medical records and the patient's treatment. I mean, I would be a paraplegic today if I had to wait as long for an MRI as my Canadian patients have to wait. It was that close that I would lose function of my spine from the neck down. But I was able to get the care I needed quickly, get an MRI, get to Johns Hopkins, get the spinal surgery I needed, and I'm fully functioning today because of that. But I have many Canadian patients that live in pain and disability, and they're a burden on their families, and they don't want to be, and yet they can't get the care they need. That brings me to something that I also think is absolutely urgent. First of all, I have written 6 books for consumers to help women know how to take better charge of their health and address the health problems that they're not getting answers for. My first book was Screaming to be Heard, Hormone Connections Women Suspect and Doctors Ignore. The second one is called Women, Weight, and Hormones. And the third one is It's My Ovaries, Stupid.
I cracked up when I read that one. That was great. And by the way, folks, links to those books will be on the On the Right Side Radio, along with the links to Dr. Vliet's websites. So, if you didn't write them down, go to ontherightsideradio.com. As you know, the shows get posted contemporaneously with our AM broadcasts, and all this information, including Dr. Vliet's books, will be there for you. And I suggest you bone up, ladies, bone up. But you know what strikes me? I mean, the women that I know in my life, and by the way, I'm similar to you. I've had 2 back surgeries, and, heaven forbid if I had delayed. The women in my life would be devastated. If something happened to them, they couldn't get themselves fixed health-wise, and they couldn't take care of or enjoy their family, their grandkids, their kids, their parents, whatever. Right. And I think they would be almost more devastated, most women that I know, if something happened to somebody in their family, whether it's their kid or their parent. And it could be fixed, but the fix is denied, and the money isn't available. And the strain and burden would create conflicts between the women and their spouses or their other halves and within the familial unit. I mean, the ramifications of this bill in terms of the family and in terms of overall happiness are just, when I sit back and think about it, particularly from a female perspective, because I know how I feel as a father. I mean, I know how I feel as a grandfather. I know how I feel as a son. And I would have to double or triple that for a gal, who are typically more emotional. I mean, devastating psychological, spiritual, and emotional trauma.
Well, I don't think people understand, unless you've been sick, unless you've had a major illness, and cancer is a great example. People not being able to get diagnosed with cancer because they are long wait, so you don't have access to a doctor. I mean, doctors are leaving the system because of the coming regulations. Doctors are under siege, too. So if you can't get a doctor, you don't know what you have, it's devastatingly painful to be knowing that something's wrong with your body and you don't know what it is, and you can't get help to get it fixed. And
I mean, sometimes the worry is worse than the knowledge.
Well, that's
we've all seen that. We've all seen that in friends or family members. I mean, people gnashing their teeth while they're waiting for a prognosis. I mean, it's a horrible thing to watch people go through.
And one of the things that I think people are going to need to start doing to prepare for this, number one, you need to be looking at your retirement savings and planning for having to set aside some savings to go outside of the U.S. to get care that may be denied here. That's not on most people's radar screen right now, and it needs to be. They need to be getting copies of their medical records and knowing what's in them before they get turned over to the government in 2015. You need to start making corrections to your medical records. Get your personal copy. Keep it with you. Travel with it. Know what your Medicus medicines are. Know what your medical history is. And I provide a notebook to keep my patients' medical records in because I want them to have all this information in their own control. But the other thing people need to be doing is taking more control of their own health. And doing the things to make yourself less vulnerable to the medical care system that is getting worse and longer delays as we go forward. I mean, what are some of those things? I sound like your grandmother talking, but eat right, exercise more, don't smoke, don't drink too much alcohol, stress management, getting enough sleep, eating a healthy breakfast. All of these things have been shown to increase longevity and reduce disease risk, and yet Americans don't pay much attention to it because they tend to think, well, a doctor's going to fix me. Well, the day is coming when the fix is going to be what you do to stay healthy, not what your government doctor is going to try and do after the fact, and may not have all of the resources we've been used to having.
Well, bottom line is the fix will probably be denied and the doctor won't exist. You know, I mean,
well, that's right.
That's the facts. That's the facts, Jack. We're actually at the end of the show here, and this has been one quick hour. I've learned a lot. I'm going to have you back, and we will dwell more, particularly on what people can do to try and protect themselves from the beast. These last tidbits that you share with us are terrific. I mean, great idea on starting to put away. Forget the fact that the health savings accounts are being abolished by Obamacare because they don't want you self-reliant. Establish your own. You just won't call it a health savings account, but that's what it'll be known as in your household. And you know, salt away for a rainy day. Keep yourself in shape. Go back to that self-reliant American spirit, because that's right. They're not here to help you, and they ain't going to. So that is it today, folks, for Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side with Dr. Elizabeth Vliet. Please go to the website On the Right Side Radio and take a look at her websites, which are terrific, and they will get you a leg up, particularly International Health Strategies LTD.com site. Start thinking about international, shall we say, proactive intervention in the future, because you may need it. And we will join you next week with the last part of our Obamacare series, and it'll be a corker, I guarantee you, because we're going to have another pro-Obamacare Obama administration mouthpiece on. And I'm sure they will have listened to the shows prior, and they should be loaded for bear, and so will yours truly, your rancher, Reid Lance Rosenthal.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, An American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's ontherightsideradio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.